Hey, world history. Welcome to U12-L3, Basics of Enlightenment. So, the learning target is to identify the major intellectual and scientific development of the 17th and 18th century Europe, describe the regional and global influence on the European scientific revolution and Enlightenment, and assess their impact on global society. Whoa, that's a lot. Anyway, so your job today, questions that I want you to answer directly on the Ed puzzle will be in blue text. Any text in red will be an important concept on your study guide, so make sure you are following along with your study guide. Enlightenment. Okay. So, Enlightenment. That was a time period between about the late 1600s to the early 1800s. So it kind of butts up with the end of the Renaissance and then, of course, into the 1800s. And to kind of put that into perspective as well, okay, so like the United States, that's a new nation at that time in the early 1800s. There's some people like the founding fathers who were a part of the Enlightenment movement, such as this dude right here, who's Ben Franklin. So during the Enlightenment movement, scholars were rethinking the old beliefs and brought new insight into religion, economics, education, and specifically government. So the intellectual movement stressed reason and thought. Okay, so it also stressed the importance of individuals to problem solve on their own. So instead of people just blindly believing in churches and their political rulers, the people of the Enlightenment wanted everyone to think for themselves, to be critical of everything around them. So there are two really big main thinkers in the Enlightenment movement. And the first dude, his name is Thomas Hobbes, and the other dude is John Locke. And they're very different on their views of humanity. So let's talk about Thomas Hobbes first. So he fought in the English Civil War, which lasted from about 1642 to 1651. So that's 9 years. That's a long time to be fighting in a war. So it's definitely going to do some damage to his beliefs in humanism. So during it, Hobbes concluded that humans were naturally wicked and selfish. And in order to combat this, humans would then give up their rights to a strong ruler. But in return, that strong ruler would give people law and order. Okay, so yeah, he was kind of a pessimist when it came to his views on humankind. He also believed that the best government was something called an absolute monarchy. Now, this is when a king or queen rules a country and they rule all the aspects of government and they have unlimited power. Okay, so no one's there to tell them no, pretty much. The other guy is John Locke. Now, he had a little bit more of an optimistic outlook on humans. He believed people could learn from experience and improve upon themselves. He also believed that humans have a natural ability to self-govern and create welfare in society. And he also believed all people were born free and equal, which is something today we kind of take somewhat for granted in the United States, right? But during the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, remember, slavery was very, very real. It was very much so a thing. So this was a really radical idea that he had. So he also believed all people had the right to life, liberty, and property. And the purpose of the government was to protect these three rights. And as you can imagine, he also very much so disagreed with Hobbes and his depressing views on humanity. So, life, liberty, property? Where have I heard this before? At least something similar. The Declaration of Independence of the United States. Yes, it is in here. Yes, the people who wrote the Declaration of Independence took this from Locke, okay? So if you can see here on this line, it says, "We hold their truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Yep. Enlightenment era really influenced the beginning of the United States during this time. So next up, we'll talk about philosophes. So philosophes are just the French word for philosopher. So in English, we just call them philosophers. So a philosopher is a person who studies ethics and logic. So we talked about a little bit with philosophers in Unit 1 when we talked about the Greek unit. So in the mid-1700s, a bunch of philosophers came together in Paris, France, and they talked about a bunch of stuff and kind of made rules about philosophy. So they all agreed that people could apply reason to all aspects of life, okay? So just like how scientists follow theories and math formulas, philosophers would also follow theories and reasons, okay? And they created something called the 5 concepts of reasoning. And I'm going to go through those with you today. So, 5 concepts of reasoning. Number 1, reason. So, the truth can be discovered through reason and logic. So, pretty much saying that if people think about their situation, think about society, they can discover the truth. Nature. Now, this one was a little bit tricky. I had to read quite a few articles about this to like fully understand what it means. And honestly, I don't still know if I fully understand it. But nature would be what was natural was also good and reasonable. So people would be punished for wrongdoings by nature, not necessarily society. So it's kind of like karma, where natural consequences happen without someone without like other humans influencing it. Yeah, it's a little tricky. All right, then we have happiness. So people should find joy on earth and not focus on the joy in the afterlife. And this was a real big kind of stab towards the Catholic Church or any of the churches, because, right, with religion, they're like, oh, your life will be better in the afterlife, where philosophers were like, no, you should enjoy your time here on earth. Number 4, progress. Society and mankind can improve itself. Very optimistic. And liberty. So that would be the freedom to elect members of a government, freedom of speech in a government, freedom from royal interference with the law, and freedom from cruel and unusual punishment and excessive bail. And there's some other ones too that they list off, but these are like kind of the ones that might sound familiar because we have these in the United States, or at least very similar liberties. All right, so now let's talk about some specific Enlightenment era philosophers. So we'll talk about the first one. His name is Voltaire. That was actually his pen name. So his real name was Francois Marie Arouet. I don't know. I don't know French. Okay. So he was a French philosopher and he published more than 70 books and essays. Like this guy was busy. So he fought for the rights of religious belief and the freedom of speech. And the Catholic Church really, really, really hated him. He was actually sent to prison twice because of the things he was saying. And he was also exiled to England. So if you remember, right, with King Henry VIII, like he broke away from the Catholic Church. Remember that? Yeah, so England was a safe haven for Voltaire. And he has this very, very famous quote called, "I do not agree with a word you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it." All right, the next one is Baron de Montesquieu. So he was a French writer. I know, a lot of French people in this. So he wrote a book called On the Spirit of Laws, and that said that there must be a separation of powers in the government. So that way, no one person in the government would have too much power. And this created something called the system of checks and balances. And it is the exact system that the US government has based their checks and balances on. So you can thank this dude here for checks and balances in today's US government. Then you have Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He was a French philosopher as well, and it was during a time when philosophers believed people could improve life through reason, science, art. Rousseau was on the pessimistic side, okay? He disagreed with all of this. So he believed that only direct democracy government could give people the unlimited freedom that they needed. And if you don't know what a direct democracy is, that's all right. You'll get there when you take your government class, which will be for most of you next year. So direct democracy is when citizens vote directly on reforms and laws in the government. So here in the United States, we don't have a direct democracy, okay? So what we do in the United States is that we vote for representatives, and then those representatives vote on laws and reforms. Now, in a direct democracy, that's where just everyday citizens vote for laws and reforms. So let's say, like, a state wants to raise taxes, okay? All the citizens that are able to vote would then vote if that state should raise taxes or not. So there's just a little example. So Rousseau had the beliefs would then inspire the French Revolution, which we'll talk about in the next video. And the French Revolution was from 1789 to 1799. All right, then we have Mary Wollstonecraft, and she wrote an essay called A Vindication on the Rights of Women in 1792. And this was really famous because it was actually an essay in response to one of the essays that Rousseau wrote. So Rousseau wrote that women should not be educated equal to men, and Mary very much so disagreed with that. She believed education should be as equal as a man's and encouraged women to go into the medical fields and also political fields. Oh, fun fact, her daughter wrote Frankenstein. That's my fun fact. Enjoy. All right, so next we have Alexander Cromwell. So he was alive from 1819 to 1898. So he's a little bit newer than the other philosophers that we just talked about, and he's not French. He's actually American. So he was a Black American philosopher. He was very well educated. He attended an interracial school as a youth, and he was so well educated that he wanted to actually be an Episcopal minister, but he was denied from the church and the college simply due to race. So instead, he went to England and he studied at Queen's College, which accepted people of color. So after he studied at Queen's College, he actually went to Liberia, which is in West Africa, and became a missionary, pastor, and professor. And after 20 years, he decided to move back to the United States. So while he was in the United States, he advocated for more Black leaders in the churches and also taught as a professor at Howard University and founded something called the American Negro Academy, which was an intellectual society for Black scholars. All right, next we're going to talk about more of the negative, dark side of Enlightenment. So, most of you have taken biology last year, and you probably talked about Charles Darwin. So, here's my question for you. Do you remember Charles Darwin? And if so, what do you know about him? So, Charles Darwin is very famous because he explored many different biomes, environments with plants and animals around the world, okay? One of his most famous stops would have been the Galapagos Islands, which is right here on the map to the left of South America. And his voyage was 4 years. It's from 1831 to 1835. And you can see it was literally a world voyage. So he started up here in England, went down through South America, up to the Galapagos Islands, cut across to the Pacific, through Australia and New Zealand, down through the Cape of Good Hope in Africa, and then back up to Europe. Yeah, that's pretty impressive. So, he noted in his book this concept of survival of the fittest. Okay? So, scientifically, survival of the fittest refers to organisms who are the best adjusted to their environment, are the most successful in surviving and reproducing. So, for example, like lizards in the desert, right? It's dry in the desert. So, lizards have scales in order to trap in water into their bodies so water doesn't evaporate from their bodies. There's also a lot of sand blowing around. So, usually lizards have a membrane over their eyes to protect their eyes from the sand. Or you can think of penguins, like emperor penguins, okay? So, they live in a super cold climate. So, they need a lot of fat storage. So, that's why they have cute little chubby figures so they can stay warm in the super cold climate. Those would be examples of survival of the fittest. But some very power-hungry Europeans chose to interpret survival of the fittest in a very, very different way, okay? So this is something called social Darwinism, and it is the false idea that certain people become powerful in society because they are simply born better. Okay, I'm going to repeat that definition one more time. Social Darwinism is the false idea that certain people become powerful in society because they are born better. So it's literally if someone would say to you, well, My daddy's richer than yours. Well, that must mean I'm better than you. Or if you want to take it in more of a historical content or context, in the 1800s, if a European said, you people are still using outdated tools and have a non-European style of government, well, I use iron and have guns, so I'm better than you. So I'm going to conquer, colonize, enslave, and massacre you. All right, so social Darwinism would lead to pseudosciences that analyze social Darwinism regarding race and religion. So we talked about pseudoscience last unit. And just a reminder, pseudoscience is statements, beliefs, or practices that claim to be both scientific and factual, but are not proven with the scientific method. Okay? They are not proven. Okay. So, pseudosciences. These would then lead to the false sense of white Europeans to conquer non-white, non-European nations. No, I should clarify that the vast majority of this was with Europeans, but there are some exceptions to this. One of the big exceptions would be Japan, and that's one of the reasons why they kind of get in trouble and then they get involved with World War II. So with imperialism, that will be next unit, but pretty much how pseudoscience leads to imperialism, and then it leads to colonization, and that leads to racism. Racism leads to slavery and or discrimination, and then that in turn turns into massacres and or genocides. And also the thing with colonization and imperialism, once a colonizer leaves a territory, typically they suck that territory dry of natural resources, so there's little to no resources left, and have a very dysfunctional government. So today we talked about Enlightenment, Thomas Hobbes, absolute monarchy, John Locke, philosophies, Voltaire, Baron de Montesquieu, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Mary Wollstonecraft, Alexander Crummell, Charles Darwin, survival of the fittest, and social Darwinism. Next up, you are going to do U12-L4, French Revolution Crash Course, and U12-L5, European Industrial Revolution Crash Course. So I love crash courses. John Green's great. The only thing I don't like about him is he talks really fast sometimes, but he explains the French Revolution and the Industrial Revolution way better than I ever could dream to do it. So that's why I just put in those crash course videos for y'all to watch. And then you have U12-L6, which is the Haitian Revolution Part 1, and then L7 is Part 2. That is another Edpuzzle videos. Both of those are. They're from PBS Special, so those aren't mine either. And because of that, you will answer the questions directly on the Edpuzzle. Like they'll pop up, they're all multiple choice, and I'll be grading on what answers you do get right or wrong for that. So just FYI. And then to kind of round out the unit, you have U12-L8 Revolution Video Choice. So again, that's just a video choice. You have 4 videos, choose 2 of them to watch. There's also the optional Unit 12 Practice Kahoot, which is really helpful for the Unit 12 test, just FYI. And then, of course, to end the unit, you have the Unit 12 test. All right, if you have questions, comments, want to learn more, email us. We're here to help. Thanks for watching. Bye.